Hello, and welcome back to Measuring Learner Data and Assessment. This is Week 5, Lecture 1, Current Climate, Current Impacts, and Future Impacts. As we wind down our time together, it is important that we look at some of the overarching impacts of measuring learner data and assessment on our practice and profession. This lecture will discuss those impacts on our planning, practice, and reflection as educators. We will also be taking a look at the current climate of assessment and how that is impacting our profession and how that current climate will impact our predictions regarding the future of measuring learner data and assessment. This week's lectures will most likely be shorter than previous weeks as we look forward to how all of this impacts your practice and profession. First, meta, impacts of measuring learner data and assessment on planning. When I was first going through my coursework to get my degree in social studies education, I was told that the best way to plan is to begin with the end in mind. Look at the standards surrounding the topics you'll be teaching and what they require. Think about the skills you want students to be able to demonstrate as a result of this unit of instruction, and plan with those goals in mind as your endpoints. These goals remain. Assessment, no matter how it is being implemented, remains the easiest and most straightforward way to gather and measure learner data. Without learner data, it is impossible for an educator to truly know if they are achieving their goals. Therefore, planning must start with an eye to the way the educator will be assessing the learning they are facilitating. Impacts on practice. As discussed at length throughout these 5 weeks, assessment impacts practice. Whether you are taking time to give a diagnostic assessment to see where your students' abilities currently lie, or engaging in a variety of formative assessments to measure learner data on the fly and in real time, or giving an interim or summative assessment, proper planning for assessment will lead to integration of assessment throughout your practice. The goal would be to create a system where this assessment happens as fluidly as possible and with as little interruption to the flow of the class. Impacts on reflection. Just as teaching is a cycle, so is the reflection on the data that is gathered via assessment. A good teacher reflects on their practice on a day-by-day, if not class-by-class and lesson-by-lesson basis. The data that is gathered through assessment provides a window into the effectiveness of that practice and reflection. This is why we are talking about any of this in the first place. Reflection offers us as educators what so many other professions are never given: a chance to do what we do over again and to do it better. We plan, we teach, we assess, we reflect, all so that we can plan better, teach better, assess better, and then reflect again better. The current climate. What is it? The current climate of assessment is volatile. Decision makers at the top seem to be hell-bent on increasing the amount of assessment that is required. It is actually easy to understand why this is. We ourselves are saying that assessment provides data that is indispensable to the process of education. The issue is that there are so many different decision makers requiring assessment. That means that the sheer number of assessments that students must take keeps getting larger and larger. This is leading to backlash from teachers and families, not to mention students, which is making the educational climate very, again, volatile. How does that impact our practice? First, teaching to the test. The more assessments that are required, the more teachers are beginning to teach directly to those assessments. This has led, as previously discussed, to a climate in which students view tests as the only thing of importance, and teachers are beginning to feel less and less like integral and dynamic actors in the lives of their student populations, and more like content delivery automatons. Interruption of classroom instruction time. Add to the frustration of teaching content that only leads to the test and not being able to focus on material that the teacher or class deems worthwhile outside of that, There's also the impact of the loss and interruption of classroom instruction time. Since the assessment is the only thing of importance, we are taking more and more time to prepare the students for the assessments themselves through remediation and review activities. This takes up valuable class time and again, frustrates educators. Shifting educator perspectives on assessment. All of this is leading educators to begin to change their views on assessment. When I began teaching, I didn't really view assessment as particularly positive or negative. It just was. It was something that I needed. I needed to be able to measure learner data, and so I included assessments. Actually, I would say that I probably even viewed them in a positive light, since the data that I was able to get from them so clearly helped me to reflect on my decisions and, hopefully, make better ones moving forward. Since I have seen the increase in assessments, though, in so many different areas, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to include other educators in this, have begun to see assessments in a negative light. It is impossible for an educator to totally hide their feelings from their classes, so students are left in an odd position where they are constantly bombarded with announcements and threats about how important these assessments are, but also see that the assessments are becoming objects of loathing for their teachers. This is not a good place to be moving forward. How does the current climate inform our predictions about the future of measuring learner data and assessment? So how will all of this change? I don't know. The optimistic side of me wants to predict that decision makers will begin to see that, while assessment is of course integral to the process of education, the amount of assessment we are inundating our students with is counterproductive, and we will begin to see a more comprehensive set of assessments that are developed by actual educators being used. The pessimistic side of me thinks that that time is still pretty far off. It has been made obvious throughout this course that the measurement of learner data through assessment is something that continues to impact our planning, practice, and most importantly, reflection. These impacts are important, and with the current climate surrounding assessment being what it is, continue to increase. How that increase will affect education in the future remains to be seen.